Let me introduce myself to you. I'm Barbara Biber, member of the faculty of Bank Street College of Education in New York City. And by training, I'm a psychologist. By interest, I think I best describe myself as someone who has cared very deeply about how children learn, how they grow, and especially what kind of schooling we can provide for them that will give them the best opportunity to develop into healthy and effective human adults. I'm talking to you today because we face the sudden and challenging prospect of having thousands, hundreds of thousands of our very young children, 4- and 5-year-olds, enter school. Our purposes are known to all of us. This is part of an effort to compensate, if we can, for the deprivation that many children have suffered because of the circumstance of life into which they were born. One of the serious things that may happen in connection with our interest in bringing these 4- and 5-year-old children of disadvantaged families into school is that we may create stereotypes of the disadvantaged child or the disadvantaged as a group of people. We're not dealing with a type of people or a type of child. The children, like the members of the families from which they come, react differently to poverty and to deprivation, to cruelty and to misery. For most of them, the serious life deficits of living under poverty leave serious scars, but there are many children who will impress us by the way in which they have come out of unfortunate life circumstance, still are developing as effective, articulate, skillful children. Perhaps the basic issue is that we shall remain aware of each of the children for the separate person that he is. Our first task is really to try to understand, as far as we are able, what are the basic life deficits of most of these children. Then after that, to think briefly about what adaptations of our usual school procedures or relationships with young children should be made to meet these children where they are. This kind of adaptation to children is part of our general approach in any case in all work with young children. The teacher of a young child perceives a child as a member of his family coming from home into a strange school situation, needing and deserving to be understood as part of the life in which he has been growing up. Turning to the problem of the effects of disadvantaged living, it's possible to think of the life deficits of the disadvantaged child at different levels, some likely to be more seriously injurious to the child's whole development than others. And I would like to review briefly 3 different levels of deficit that can be associated with the patterns of life of families who are living under negative conditions of poverty. Now, first, there's a pretty general observation. These children do not have the skills of language that are expected at their stage of development. It's not only that their language is immature, but the thought processes that are necessarily expressed in language are also immature. They have not really advanced to being able sometimes to know the things in their world, to discriminate one thing from another, and often they do not know the names of simple objects in their surroundings. The general information is limited, and the usual expectation of a teacher of young children, of an interested, curious, questioning, probing child, is not always fulfilled in the first days in which the children come to school. Now, these deficits are often explained in terms of the fact that these children have had a very restricted life experience, and sometimes they've never really been off the street on which they live, a bounded life, that they've not been in families where much conversation goes on or where the use of language is really developed, that the family pattern doesn't include reading or newspapers or books. It's just a built-in part of life at home. And even that these children, many of them, have not had real chances to play, or that they haven't had things to play with, crayons, blocks, the kinds of things that middle-class families take for granted as part of their provision for the children. Now, this restricted experience, both in terms of the use of language or the hearing of language, accompanied with the lack of experience with things and activities that other young children have at home, represents a clear and a great hindrance in mastering language as a tool, since a young child talks and thinks according to the model of talking and thinking that he has before him in his home when he's young. The outcome of this deficit, we have found, leads to difficulties in learning later on, in learning to master the written language system, in learning to read. And the vicious spiral takes hold when the child feels himself a failure in school in the first or the second or the third grade, writes himself off as a relatively worthless human being. This is, of course, the great human waste that the anti-poverty program is seeking to correct. Aware as we all are that these children are like all other children, the same potentialities, the same curiosity, the same eagerness to know and to understand. Even while we say all this, we have to stop a minute and correct ourselves and remember that there are some children who, in the clutter and the noise of city streets, have found wonderful ways of playing, have in fact exercised such imaginativeness in what you can do with a piece of wood or an old tire that one has to recognize for these children, as many as there are, who can really overcome the barrenness, may make something meaningful in their own independent play lives. There may be a sense of their own resourcefulness to create and to overcome that has tremendous power. We need to be aware about all the children of disadvantage, that many of them come bringing strengths as well as deficits into our schoolrooms, and to become sensitive and understanding about what these strengths are. If we turn to another way of looking at deficits, or call it another level of being disadvantaged, we come to this idea. Underneath the meagerness of language that the child experienced at home, there is perhaps a more serious barrenness psychologically. The people he lives with are not only not talking to each other and using language freely in a richly developed way, it may well be that they're really not in very close touch with each other as people, that the child hasn't been noticed as the particular person that he is, that adults haven't played with him very much. He hasn't been involved in the kinds of connections with people from the very beginning of his life that help a child know who are the familiar people, who wants to hear your questions, who will stop long enough to answer them, who are the strange people, who are the ones who won't look around and notice you. Perhaps his relations have always been only the very practical, functional relations, life at its minimal essentials, with little left of energy or resources for making life a little richer, more varied, more enjoyable, more interesting. When you think of the very earliest development of children, one wonders whether these children have had the experience that we're familiar with. Before a baby can talk in many families, there's a mother or a father or another adult who gurgles back to him his own nonsense syllables, who's there to respond to his earliest smiles, or later on when he becomes a toddler and shows signs of playing, who recognizes his play and what he is trying to say in his play before he can put anything into words. Much joint understanding and communication goes on among people at all stages and ages without the use of language. And when a child is very young, this way of feeling related to other people, especially the people who are very important to him in his life, is an essential part of his wholesome development. Has there been in these children's homes somebody who answers choo-choo when he pulls a box across the floor? Has there been somebody who hands him a piece of cloth to cover up the doll that he begins to play with? These are only the simplest examples of a way of life between children and adults, a way of life among the adults themselves that becomes part of a child's basic learning and development. It's a matter of connecting with people, being sensed as a person by other people, being involved in many rich and important and varied kinds of relations with the human beings with whom one lives. What the child misses here is not only a model of spoken language, but much more fundamentally this lack of rich, meaningful human communication beyond just the necessities of practical living. These lacks are deterrents for language usage, indeed. They become deterrents for learning to read eventually. But more than that, more deeply, they are deterrents for being able to learn in general, because it is through the active relationships with people, it is through being known and felt and understood as a person that the child's basic curiosity and interest in the world begins to flower and develop. Maybe a third level of deficits is one that we would consider the most serious one of all. Here we think of the children who can be said to be living precariously on the edge of safety. This doesn't apply to many children, but we have to keep them in mind, because when we do get them in a school group, they're the ones who will require tremendous understanding and skillful handling on the part of the teachers and the others in the school. These are the children who cannot be sure of the basic necessities. Will there be enough food? Is there somebody to take care of you? There is clear and deep uncertainty in their lives about whom they really belong to. Who is the father? Is the mother available to the child in important mothering ways? In fact, is there anybody that really cares about this child in a deep and important way? The basic needs of the very young child, to be sure that somebody cares about him, wants him, will take care of him, have not been fulfilled for these children. In addition, in the disturbed family lives in which they find themselves, the world is one of unpredictable threats. The parents, living under extreme conditions of stress and disturbance, do not represent consistent figures for the child. The child may be hit or punished or deprived when there's no connection, in fact, with anything that he has done. He may simply be the innocent subject of the displaced panic of the panicked parents. This means that the whole unpredictable world of the child carries a threat with it. Everybody who comes into his world is naturally suspect instead of trusted. The psychological uncertainty of such a way of life to a child is, of course, reinforced by the disorder of the physical environment, which is likely also to be characteristic of highly disturbed and deprived family situations. For the children who come from these unusual, but unhappily existing home situations, one expects deeply anxious forms of behavior. Here, the deterrent to development is not only poverty of language and thought and experience. It's not only that the child's been living in a minimal world of human relationships and has never been realized as an individual. It's more that he's living in such a threatening, uncertain, unordered life environment that we do not expect him to be able to take his place in school or to make use of what it offers without a tremendous amount of guidance and support and relearning in the kind of ordered situation that the school represents. This kind of life deficit diminishes the development of personality at its very roots. Well, just as there are different levels at which to understand the nature of developmental deficit for these children, so there are different ways of thinking about how we shall adjust our educational practices. Certainly, we want to take recognition of the importance of bringing their language, their ideas, their understanding, their ways of gaining knowledge to higher and more developed levels than they've been able to accomplish so far. I cannot recount here all the ways in which a good school with all children tries to develop skills in language and thinking, but stop only to make a few comments on what seems to be especially important for these children as we have learned it from teachers who are already working with them. For example, one way of being sure that children become better talkers is to listen to them very hard, to try to understand them, even when their words, their accents, their pronunciation may seem very strange and very distant from what we as teachers expect. We need to recognize that they need to learn, too, how to be listening people. Can it be expected just to sit down in an orderly way in a group and listen to a teacher reading a lovely story without being prepared for such an experience? And this kind of preparatory experience can take many forms. It may be having a lot of pictures around that one talks about with the children, or asks the children to recognize, to talk about. It may be that when one finally does try to read a story to the children, one keeps to a minimum the amount of reading and chooses books that have colorful pictures so the children can respond to the pictures and not be expected to sit for any length of time listening to a plot in a story. There are endless games that we can learn from experienced teachers which involve the child not only using words and learning the names of objects, but which work to the kind of discriminating and differentiating of his ideas that are basic to his thought processes. There are ways of developing songs in which the teacher mentions each child's name or some particular bit of each child's clothing, and in doing this accomplishes two things. Makes the child feel how recognized he is as a person, how noticed by the teacher. At the same time, the teacher is including in this kind of play and group life the ideas and the words that become tools for further thinking. There are specific techniques developed by teachers, too. Some of them have to do with the recognition of written symbols. For example, the teacher who uses very simple symbols that stand one for each child before the child can recognize his printed name. Or when the children have become more accustomed to school life, the teacher puts labels on the buildings that they make with their blocks. Many a 4-year-old loves this building all the more because the teacher has written on it, on a card, "This is a firehouse," or even, perhaps more happily, "This is Jimmy's firehouse." Free, spontaneous play and activities are especially conducive to the development of language and communication among the children themselves. And of course, basic to the development of language and thought is that the children shall have rich experience about which to talk and to think and to wonder and to play. And for this, too, there are also available and well-developed techniques. How to take children on a trip outside of school, how to prepare them, what to stimulate them to think about ahead of time, how to encourage them to review and rehearse and play back the experience that they have had. Not only the widening of experience, but the teacher who herself becomes a model of interest in everything around, who herself cares about the questions that are being raised, who raises her own questions, who is intent in making her own observations. All these become the material out of which more developed language evolves. In the early stages, when the children just come to school, the sensitivity of the teacher is, of course, the vital factor. The teacher who recognizes how receptive she needs to be in order to communicate to the child without saying so, that she wants to understand and to hear what he has to say, and that she can wait until he says it. There are endless opportunities for developing better cognitive skills in the course of children's activities in school. The teacher who's interested in having them develop some skill in the number system puts questions to them. How many boys are sitting around in the circle today? How many girls are sitting around? Did you want 3 more blocks or did you want 2 more blocks to finish your building? But in addition to this use of the daily life of the children for developing their language skills and their ideas, there have been developed a considerable number of techniques definitely designed for this purpose. These may be very useful to the teacher of these children, so long as the teacher keeps a watchful eye on her basic goal, namely that only the kind of experience that really supports the process of communication for these children is educationally vital for them at this stage and should have primary consideration. There's another way which we can help children make the best use of the opportunity for learning and development. In one sense, you could say that this comes down to certain very practical functions, remembering that these children now are not accustomed to this kind of regulated, orderly life. In fact, all children have a period of adjustment to make to the rules and the regulations of life in a group situation when they come as young as these. But these children come less ready, less prepared to take their place as individuals in a group. One of the most important things that we can do for the children is to have things very clear, very simple, very well organized. In this room, there should be no higgledy-piggledy, no piling up of things, no atmosphere of junk put aside. The schedule, the program of activities should be clear. The children should be helped to understand how we do this, then we do that, then we do the next. The adults in this situation need to be cued in to when things are likely to come to a disorderly state, such as times when the children are changing from one activity or going from one place to another. And here I might interpose the remark that to provide this kind of learning situation for young children, we do indeed need more than one teacher, good helpers, and not too many children in a group at the same time. In presenting materials or new things or new activities, the teacher needs to be very concrete, very specific, very simple. Demonstrate what she means, not depend too much on wordy explanations. What she chooses for the children to do, especially in the beginning, should be equal to what she thinks they can do rather easily, without frustration, without failure experience. Since for these children, an initial negative experience can become a very inhibiting one. The goal is to build a world for them in the classroom that is a clear world in which they know where things are, what's going to happen next, have a set of clear expectations that they can count on. In another way, we find that some teachers have been surprised to find that the children, far from taking to the toys and the materials as a wonderful playland, a wonderful opportunity to have a great time, seem rather indifferent to the things. Pick them up, drop them, go past them, not do anything much with them, allow them to fall, to break, to become destroyed. And there are different ways of trying to understand why the children should behave this way with all these attractive objects. Maybe one can say, on one hand, they're just not accustomed to having things. Certainly one is clear that they do not see these things for the possibilities that they represent as tools for play. But there's another way of looking at it, too. And perhaps their indifference to these things is that these children are not accustomed to really caring for things. In fact, if one has not been preciously, deeply cared for oneself, perhaps one does not have a caring attitude toward other people, toward other children, or even toward other objects. One teacher in this situation reacted by doing two things. First, she was practical. She tried to buy practically indestructible objects. But in the second place, she tried to give the children some direct experience of caring, so that her helper sat in a part of the room for days and got the children to help her to clean, to mend, to rebuild the things that suffered from destructive use, and they enjoyed doing this. This perhaps serves as one illustration of how, in working with these children, one can be helped by trying to see in their behavior the results of what their experience in life has been, and to provide them with those new experiences in school that replace the negative aspects of their early childhood lives. And there's another way in which the teacher of these children may carry her role somewhat differently than she would if she were working with children with other life experience. One of her goals for all children is to initiate them toward free play activity. But these children, she realizes, that they need more active guidance. They need almost a literal taking by the hand to begin to use things meaningfully. Here the teacher has to do much more of one might call priming the pump in order to get the child to be aware of what he can do. She may do more playing with him and talking with him about what you could use this for, or what you could use that for, how you might build a building, talking with him about the ideas he has of what he's going to do with the doll that he's carrying around listlessly, stimulating him and leading him gradually to a more, and steadily, nevertheless, to a more independent way of initiating ideas and thinking up play schemes that he can engage in with other children. Basically, we cannot separate what these children will be able to learn and how much they can improve their language, how ready they can be for the next stages in school, how much they can begin to enjoy the exciting experiences of play, or the exciting experience of playing with each other. We cannot separate all these developments from the relations that the teacher and the people who help the teacher come to have to the children as people. This involves understanding on part of all the adults. It involves expecting that the children would not necessarily trust and love people who give them all these good things from the very beginning. In fact, they may treat the adults with suspicion and establish a great deal of distance between themselves and the adults. They may need to be encouraged to learn how to share pleasures and excitement and understanding. This will take place to the extent that the teachers are sensitive. Do not move in too fast on the children, but build up around the life of the school such a way of living with the children that they have extended the safety zone. That the children can realize and believe at last that these are supporting and predictable grown-ups. That they come to learn, as they will, that there will be controls. This is not a place where one can go wild, where one can upset, where one can destroy. But this is a place where the adults do not threaten or punish the child in whom such behavior emerges, but are ready to give him new ways of learning how to handle his anger, his anxiety, his hostile feeling. There's no way of detailing all that many teachers know about how this happens. Much of it has to do with what happens within the child, how he comes to feel that he is, in a deep sense, a worthwhile human being, that he is known to the teacher and the other adults as an individual with distinct characteristics, that he will not be ostracized for his negative impulses. In fact, the adults around him understand these impulses and will help him control them and keep them from having terrible effects on him or on the other children. Perhaps one instance of a teacher will serve to illustrate in concluding some of these points about a teacher's relation to children. In this case, it was a consultant who came into a room in a daycare center and noticed that a bird and its cage had been placed up on the top shelf. The teacher's explanation was it was impossible to keep it down at the level of the children. All the children wanted to do was to bang on the cage. That kept the bird fluttering around, disturbed the bird, got the children excited. The teacher finally decided the best way to handle it was to put it up out of the way. To the consultant, the bird in a cage up on a top shelf seemed like a useless appurtenance in a schoolroom. I can't tell you this incident in her words. I wish I could, but as she told it to me, she gathered a small group of children around her, few at a time. And this is important to note, because in the beginning one cannot expect to communicate with a whole large group of these children. She sat down with the bird cage in her lap, with 4 or 5 children around, and talked with them about the bird. With what does the bird eat? How do you eat? In this conversation, they were thinking, figuring out, remembering, noticing. They eat with mouths. They have two lips. A bird eats two, but a bird eats with a beak, and that's very different. That bird's beak is like somebody's mouth. And so they went on with observations and comparisons. How little a bird is, how big the children are. Or they began to look in greater detail about how the bird was made, about its feathers, how it sits, how it stands. And in such a process of communication, the children were being guided by the adult to see something in life that they had never seen before. To see this in terms of themselves, a comparison between a bird and a child. To care about this little, relatively weak, helpless bird. And in doing this, to establish a meaningful relation that had to do with ideas, with language, with an adult. The bird came down off the shelf, and both he and the consultant had become friends. It is in such teaching episodes that one sees exemplified our basic goals for educating all children, and perhaps the special goals of bringing these children into more meaningful relationships with people, at the very same time that one extends and stimulates their understanding of the world around them. Thank you.